want to start off this message by just simply asking you a question. The question is that if you knew that both hope and despair were the same paths that led to the same destination, which one would you choose? If hope and despair were paths to the same destination, which one would you choose? Turning your Bibles to Mark chapter 5, as you're turning there, I'll remind you what Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1 says. It says, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Faith is what gives substance, hope is what gives substance to faith, letting us know that without hope, faith has nothing to give substance to. That's why it's important that we not let our hopes wane. That's why it's important that we never allow our dreams to die. We are a faith people. Now, I'm not sitting here talking about it from, you got all these, some people out there, well, that's just a faith church, that's that, name it and claim it bunch. Let me tell you something, if you are a Christian, then you are yourself saying that you are a faith person. Why? Because the Bible says in Hebrews chapter 11 verse 6 that, but without faith it is impossible to please God, for he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those that diligently seek him. If you're going to continually come to God, you've got to do it by faith. So to label someone a faith person without labeling yourself that's a little bit iffy. We're all faith people because that's what it took to know Jesus as our Lord and Savior. And yet it's amazing how among faith people, hope gets a bad name. Hope gets a bad rep. Because among faith people, it's often frowned upon when, you ask the question, hey, do you believe that you receive? I know that you're believing for something, but do you believe that you receive? And they respond, I hope so. Shame on you. That's not what you're supposed to do. That's not the case. Because when it comes to the ABCs of living in God, you're going to find that faith is a very vital component. You need faith. You need hope is what I'm trying to say. Hope is something that you need in your life. Hope and faith go hand in hand with one another. We need hope in our lives. We need the attitude of that we are never going to give up. Why? Because hope may very well be the ultimate survival skill in your life. Over in Mark chapter 5, we find this where a woman, in verse 25, we'll take the time to read this, and it says, and a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse, when she heard of Jesus, came in the press behind and touched his garment. For she said, if I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up. And she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press and said, who touched my clothes? And his disciples said unto him, thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, who touched me? And he looked round about to see her that had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. And he, meaning Jesus, said unto her, daughter, thy faith has made thee whole. Go in peace and be whole of thy plague. Notice that it's in verse 34 that it's by faith that she attained that good report. Jesus said, thy faith has made you whole. This bears witness with what we find in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 2. It says, for by it, meaning by what? By faith, the elders obtained a good report. It was by faith. The actions of this woman, what she did where her healing was concerned, and seeking out and pressing in to the presence of Jesus, it was by faith that she attained that good report. Her faith is spotlighted at the very end of this story, but I believe that her story begins with hope. Because back in verse 26, we see, and she had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse. In the preceding verse, we find out that she is a woman who has this issue of blood. Well, what does that mean? That means in some form or fashion, for 12 years, this woman had dealt with some type of issue where blood was continually pouring out or flowing out of her. That's a rough situation. Nobody wants to experience that. Nobody wants to find themselves in that arena, especially not for one day, but imagine for 12 years where life is flowing out of you in some form or fashion. The Bible talks about over in the book of Leviticus that the life is in the blood. Your blood is carrying life and vitality to every organ, to every component, to every extremity of your body. That's how important the life is that your blood carries. And this woman is dealing with an issue of this. Because when life is flowing out of your body is fighting to replenish it. Your body is trying to create new blood in order to keep up with the demand of what may be flowing out of it. It's always endeavoring to generate life. This is not like a broken bone. A broken bone is where obviously your body is fighting to heal itself, but it's not like life is flowing out of your body. But that's what this woman is experiencing. Life is flowing out of her. And for 12 years, it seems that life is constantly, over and over flowing out of her body. You ever heard of the term bleeding out? That implies that life is leaving your body. And in verse 26, we saw that nothing she did made her any better. She sought everything. She went to every doctor that was in that town. She probably sought alternative drugs, alternative therapy. Maybe she sought out the Mayo Clinic to whatever new endeavor, new discovery, new research that could possibly be applied to her. She exhausted everything that she knew, not only in just doctors, but she exhausted all of her money. If you were to plot this on a chart, she would be up here. It would be a steady decline over and over and over and over and over, year after year. And yet she was nothing better. But you've got to admire this woman because after 12 years, she's still searching for the answer. She's still searching for the cure. And the problem wasn't that she was not doing anything. The problem was she just didn't know what to do. She was trying these things, but they weren't having the intended effect. She didn't know of Jesus until what? She heard of Jesus. And at that point, when she heard of Jesus, she thought, okay, here's another opportunity. But this time, there was something that sparked on the inside of her where hope became faith. And what we see here is that she was someone who never gave up hope. She never said, this is hopeless. Not one time in this account do we say, you know what, heaven would be better than this. How many times over the course of your life have you heard, somebody just dealing with a situation for just, a couple of months, maybe up to a year. Man, I'm tired of fighting this. I'm just going to go climb in bed and hope I get better. How many times have you heard people they lose all hope, they check out, and they quit? Yet this woman for 12 years kept pursuing that which she was wanting. And you can't say that and another thing about it is she never accepted this condition as the will of God in her life. Amen. She never accepted the condition as the will of God in her life. Because if at some point you've got to, possibly deal or struggle or wrestle with if I'm not going to get any better, I guess this is God's will just teaching me a lesson. She never wrestled with that because she kept on pursuing, showing you that she never believed that it was God's will for her to deal with this in the first place. She sought out other things, but finally, when she heard of Jesus, she pressed in, and her hope became faith in her life. What is hope? What is hope? Hope is an attitude. You see it with this woman in the way that she went about taking what she believed was rightfully hers. She heard of Jesus, And then she began to press in. She began to seek him out to the point where she laid hold of his hem, and the power of God flowed through her. This woman had an attitude of expectancy in her life. And that's why we need to understand that hope and faith go and work so closely together that sometimes it is difficult to distinguish between them. They overlap, they merge, they converge at some point, they intersect with one another. That's why you not only just need faith, you need hope. Hope in what Jesus wants to do in your life. So what is hope? In a generality, a hope is an expectancy. It is a general expectancy. However, there is a difference between Bible hope and worldly hope. Worldly hope is a feeling that what you want to happen will happen. You want that new car? You want that vacation? Last night I'm sitting there watching my team play the ball game. I hope that my team wins. But how many of you know there's not a thing that I could do about it? There's not a thing that I can do to determine the outcome of that game. I hope my team wins. I hope my team scores more touchdowns than the others, but there's not a single thing that I can do to help influence the outcome of that game. Now, there's people who believe that they can. There is. I remember I heard a fellow minister I was talking to one time. He said he was at this game. It was between two huge rivals. I wonder which game I'm talking about, huh? But huge two rivals. Here they are. They're going back and forth, and the game comes down to a 50-plus yard field goal. Comes down to a 50-plus yard field goal, and there you got this guy. He's telling this story about one of his friends. He's at the game. He's seeing all this go down. In order to win the game, he has to make this field goal. And so this man, he begins to pray, "Oh, Lord, please help the kicker make this field goal. Make the wind shift in his favor. Make it go through the uprights. Give him the strength in his leg to kick it and power it through." And according to this man, the Lord spoke to this man and said, "Charlie, quit praying because it ain't going to happen." And sure enough, it didn't happen. The other team won the game. But see, there's no, you can't faith in that. And these feelings of just what you want to happen will happen. But there is a Bible hope. A Bible hope is an attitude. I'm not talking about being attitude-ish, giving somebody problems. I'm talking about an attitude of, no, what God has promised, He will fulfill it in my life. It is a trustful expectation. That's what hope is, Bible hope. It is a trustful expectation. It is it is an anticipation of a favorable outcome under God's guidance. An anticipation of a favorable outcome under God's guidance. It is confidence that what God has done in the past guarantees your participation in what He will do in the future. That's Bible hope. And that's what this woman begins her story with. What she is walking in life, how she is walking throughout life. And just because, I'll put it this way, sometimes your faith walk is not as straight as a line as you think that it is. There are unexpected twists, there are unexpected turns, and that's where hope comes in your life. Think about the story of Daniel. Here's Daniel, he's a Jew, he's an Israelite, and Daniel, all of a sudden, his entire nation gets taken up. They become captive to the Babylonians. They are taken, and they are ushered into a realm that he is totally unfamiliar with. And so what does God tell Daniel? He comes to Daniel and he begins to say, he says, "Daniel, fear not." He said, "I want you to know that I'm aware of what's going on." He said, "But in this process, I want you to trust me." He said, "I do not want you to bow to any of the idols. I don't want you to pray to any of the idols. I don't want you to sacrifice to any of the idols. I don't want you to serve any of the idols." He said, "I want you to keep your trust in me." Daniel says, "Okay." But never, probably up to that point, did Daniel think that he would find himself in a lion's den. God told him all those things, shared those things with him. And I'm sure that Daniel never foresaw that, okay, I'm going to do this. God has got me. God's going to lead me. It's all going to be roses. I'm going to end up on the mountaintop. Never once did I assume did he think that he was going to end up in the lion's den. That's the power of hope. Because you may be unfamiliar with your path, but you can always know where it leads. You can always know where it leads. And that's the important, once again, of hope in our lives. Turn over to 1 Peter chapter 1. 1 Peter chapter 1. I encourage you, if you're looking for a good devotion this week, if you're wanting to study some things out, I encourage you to read 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 23. I encourage you to pull out different translations. I encourage you to get your commentary, your Bible dictionary, and I encourage you to spend time in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 23. Notice what it says in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 3. It says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which according to his abundant mercy hath begotten us again unto a lively hope by the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled, that fadeth not away, reserved in heaven for you, who are kept by the power of God through faith unto salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time." Notice in verse 3, he says, "You have been begotten again unto a lively hope." Now, once again, we're talking about faith and we're talking about hope here. And once again, I remind you that at some point they converge. So if I say something about hope and you view that as faith, don't get mad at me, because the answer is yes. At some point they converge. At some point they blend into one another. At some point hope becomes faith. And what we have right here in verse 3, it says, "You have been begotten, you have been born again into a lively hope." Notice what Peter says, the first thing that you are born again into, that is a lively hope. That's the first thing, that's the first realm, that's the first arena he wants you to see, that when you are born again, it's not, there's more to it than just being redeemed from the curse of the law of poverty, sickness, and death. No, you have a lively or a living hope that is here right now for each and every one of you. What is that a hope for? To excel in life. To excel in life. Not to have everything just a bed of roses and for you to always be on the mountains. There's going to be mountains, there's going to be valleys. But one thing you can do is continue to have your hope that you are going to excel in this life. Amen. Praise God. That you are going to excel in this life. You know, sometimes we just need to tell ourselves and remind ourselves, I'm going to get through this. I can make it. Everybody say that with me. Say, I can make it. Say it again. Say, I can make it. Say, I can make it. We need to remind ourselves of these things. That God will never let us down. That we are going to make it. That I will make my way through it. That I will not quit. Why? Because He has given us a living hope on the inside of us, that when we are born again, we can excel in this life. Yes, there's going to be tests. Yes, there are going to be trials. More frequently than we probably even want to admit. But through those, you can come out of those. You can come out of the lion's den. You can come out of the fire. You can come out of those storms. Why? Because of a hope of what God has done in you and made available to you, that if you will grab hold of that and let your story begin there, then I'm telling you, it will become faith at some point, and you'll see the desired result that you are believing God for. We see that He talks about this living hope in each and every one of us to those who are born again. And the reason I encourage you to study verses 3 through 23, I don't want to take the time to read all this for time's sake, but you're going to find three vital reasons that we need hope. Number one, hope keeps you motivated. Hope keeps you motivated. Look in verse 6, it says, "Wherein you greatly rejoice, though now for a season, if need be, you are in heaviness through manifold temptations, that the trial of your faith, being much more precious than of gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ, whom having not seen you love, in whom though now you see Him not, yet believing You rejoice with joy unspeakable and full of glory. Did you notice the roller coaster there? Did you notice the mountain, the valley, back to the mountains? That's what life is like. You're going to have good days. You're going to have bad days. You're going to have days where, man, it is thriving. It is kicking for you. Everything is going your way. You feel invincible. And then there's the days where you just look at it and think, man, this is hopeless. I don't see my way out of this. And all these feelings, dealing with hope and despair, they both lead to the same destination. But which one are you going to choose? Which one are you going to choose? Because notice here in verse 6, it starts out by rejoicing. Rejoicing. And then it goes to what? Times of heaviness because of manifold temptations. Then we get back down to verse 8, where you once again see we're back up to being joyful. Joy unspeakable and full of glory. Up and down, up and down. Your emotions will take you for that roller coaster ride. But one thing you should never let go of is hope. That even at the high times, there's still better. That at the low times, you are going to come out of it. There is better. There is more. Jesus has not forgotten you. God is not going to leave you behind. He's not going to forsake you. He's going to bring you out of it. All you need to do is just lay hold and stay, not just in hope, but know that, hey, I can hang on here. I can hang on a little bit longer. And at some point, I know that my faith is going to kick in and God's going to bring me out of this. Amen. Number 2 is hope equips you for battle. Hope equips you for battle. Many of you are familiar over in Ephesians chapter 6, we find the armor of God, the breastplate of righteousness, sword of the Spirit, the shield of faith. What's another one of those? It's the helmet of what? The helmet of salvation. That's one of the pieces that we are supposed to gird ourselves with in our daily Christian lives. Every morning when you get up, you ought to put that armor on. Or at worst, at best, sleep with it at night. Always on. Always on. But one of the things that you need to put on is that helmet of salvation. Why? Because it guards your mind. Look over at 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, talking about, Ephesians makes reference to this, it's the helmet of salvation. But in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 8, it says this, "But let us, who are of the day, be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith," once again, that speaks to a component, a piece of the armor of God, "and of love, and for a helmet, the hope of salvation." The hope of salvation. Do you see that? It's the hope that we're supposed to put on of that salvation. Hope is your helmet. Amen. Hope is that helmet that you ought to put on every day. Why? Because it guards your thought life. It guards your thoughts. It guards your mind. Your mind will give you problems when it comes to your faith walk. Well, it's not working. You prayed and God still hasn't answered. I know that you're believing for that, but man, it is not looking good. Hey, so-and-so got one before you did. You may not even get one. That helmet of hope is what keeps you grounded. It's what keeps you confident that if you'll just continue to hold on, I'm telling you, God is going to come through. God is going to come through. Faith comes from your heart. Faith is an expression of the heart. Hope is what guards our mind. Hope is what hope will keep you and your mind on track. Over in Hebrews chapter 6, notice what hope is given as an example as. Hebrews chapter 6, verse 19 says this, "Which hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, and which entereth into then within the veil," that within the veil. Notice that hope is illustrated as an anchor. Hope is your anchor. Hope is what holds you fast. I've had the opportunity to be on boats. I've had the opportunity to be on cruises. I've had the opportunity, to be on the water in that fashion. And a lot of times when you think of anchor, you automatically default to, well, it's like the anchor of a ship. Here you are, you're on a boat, and they're coming into port, they're coming into a haven, and they're getting ready to, throw the anchor so that, the boat will secure itself, the boat will be steadfast, and that way you can go on and off the island. But when it comes down to it, have you ever really thought that when you throw the anchor out there, you don't just haphazardly throw the anchor out there and it not be attached to something? The anchor is that heavy part that sinks to the bottom, that roots itself in the ground so that ship won't stray away from it. That anchor has to be attached to something, though. I remember, like I said, a lot of times we default to that, well, the anchor is like the anchor of a ship. I remember years ago, Trent, my oldest son here, he was into rock climbing. And when we lived out in California, we would go to this place, I forget the name of it, but they had, rock walls, these climbing walls that you could climb. I mean, different degrees of difficulty, some easy, some more expert. And so I would, obviously I was staying on the easy ones, but he developed to where he was able to climb some of the more expert ones because he was going up there on a daily, weekly basis. He got into the equipment. He got the shoes. He got some of the equipment. I forget some of the name of it, but it was some of the stuff that he was able to clip in. He had the rope that he was able to pull himself up by. And for other opportunities, people would help him. They would stand, as he would climb, they would hold the rope as he began to climb up. And as he began to climb these walls, he learned that as he climbed these walls, he had these clips on his belt that he would clip in to this pin, which they call an anchor. He would clip in to that anchor, and then he would begin to climb. The whole point of clipping in to that anchor was so that if he fell down not too far below where that anchor was. That anchor would catch him and prohibit him or not allow him to fall all the way back from the bottom and have to start over again. But he had to clip in. He had to clip into that anchor. And any time that he fell, yes, he fell below that anchor, but he fell to a place where it would catch. And see, hope is your anchor. Hope is that anchor when you're climbing that mountain, when you're climbing up, when you're going up, when you're ascending up the trail, and you fall, you experience a setback, there's a twist or a turn you didn't see coming, and all of a sudden you lose your footing. Hope is that anchor that even though you may fall, you're not going to fall all the way. It's going to catch you. It's going to hold you. And that's why you need to have this helmet of salvation, this hope of salvation on each and every day, because it will guard your mind. Well, you're not going to make it. You're not strong enough. You're too weak. You've only been a Christian for 1 month. You think you can do all that? No, that hope reminds you of what Jesus did for you and that He wants you to excel in life. And yet, that anchor itself cannot save you in the sense that it has to be clipped to something. Trent is climbing up. If he doesn't have anything to clip into it and he falls, then he is going all the way down to the bottom. It's your faith that connects you to your hope. Faith is that cable. Faith is the chain links from the ship to the anchor that rests at the bottom of the ocean. Your faith works, but it's your hope that holds you steadfast. It's your hope that holds you steadfast, that things do not have to be this way. Things will not always be this way. Your faith's at work. Your faith is believing God. You're believing God. Your faith's at work, and your hope is holding you steadfast that it will not always be like this. That even though I've been dealing with this for 12 years, even though I've been dealing with this for X amount of time, it will not always be this way. Your faith's at work. Your hope is holding you steadfast. So faith equips you for battle. Number 3, faith purifies you. Look in verse 15. Back over in 1 Peter chapter 1. Verse 15 says, "But as he which hath called you is holy, So be you holy in all manner of conversation, because it is written, be you holy, for I am holy. And if you call on the Father, who without respect of persons judgeth according to every man's work, pass the time of your sojourn here in fear. Back in verse 16 says, be you holy, for I am holy. God has called you to be holy. He wants you to be holy even while here on earth. How are you going to do it? As He is holy. As He has given you the example of how to walk, of how to do these things here upon earth. I'm holy, therefore you be holy, Jesus, the Lord is telling us. Your hope purifies you. And when people give up on sin, when they give up on sin and ever being free of sin, is when they sink more deeply into sin. Maybe you've heard this. People will say, well, I just wish my family would accept me as who I am. I wish the church would accept me for who I am. I wish my friends would accept me for who I am. A lot of times, what is behind that is an individual who has not been able to free themselves from sin. Because they've given up the hope that they can ever overcome what continues to trip them up day after day after day after day. Then it goes from, well, I just wish they would accept me as who I am, to, I was just born this way. I was just born this way. There was a time when people who make that statement, they didn't always believe that. They didn't always believe that. There was at some point they gave up hope that they could overcome whatever it is that Satan threw in front of them. Gave up the belief that they can't beat what the devil caused them to trip up over. You've got to have hope, because that hope will purify you. The hope of victory over sin is what will purify you. Look over to 1 John chapter 1, and you'll see this here. 1 John chapter 1, chapter 3, verse 1 says this, behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed upon us, that we should be called the sons of God. Therefore the world knoweth us not, because it knew Him not. Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when we shall appear, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. And every man that has this hope in Him purifieth himself, even as He is pure. Notice what he's talking about here. He's talking about born of God, the image of God, and conforming to what God wants us to be. If we will do that, then just as He is pure, we have the opportunity to walk in purity day in and day out ourselves. Do we always get it right? No. Do we stumble? Yes. But we have the opportunity that just as He is pure, we can walk in the same pureness within our lives. It is the hope of breaking down the wall of sin in our life and turning it around that keeps us pure. That keeps us pure. The hope of victory over sin, once again, is what purifies us. We have this same opportunity if we'll just believe. If we'll let hope be the anchor that it is supposed to be in our lives. Hope is a stepping stone on the pathway to faith. Hope is a stepping stone on the pathway to faith. Going back to the woman with the issue of blood. The woman with the issue of blood, she not only started out her story with hope. Not only did we see her faith obtain a good report, but there was at some point in her life where she had to be willing to fight for what she wanted. She had to be willing to fight for what she wanted. The Bible talks about how she moved about in the press, Press is short for pressure. She moved about in the press. She was a woman who was supposed to legally cry out that she was unclean as she moved throughout the people because of her condition. But she fought her way through the press. She did not give in to the pressure. She searched out for Jesus, and she searched for a way to get into the presence of God. And notice something about her faith. Her faith did not bring Jesus to her. Her faith took her to Jesus. So many times, and there's nothing wrong with it because it certainly works this way, but we get so dependent upon, well, I'm going to use my faith and that's going to bring the answer to me. There are going to be times where you're going to need to be prepared for faith to take you to the answer. For faith to take you to the answer. It won't always be, well, the answer is going to come to me. There may be times in your life where you have to go find that answer. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, speaking of this woman who had to fight, we are called to a fight. The Bible says in 1 Timothy chapter 6 that we are what? To fight the good fight of faith. 1 Timothy chapter 6 verse 12 says, fight the good fight of faith, lay hold on eternal life, whereunto thou art also called and hast professed a good profession before many witnesses. Faith involves a fight. It's a good fight, but it's a fight. And it's not a fight with someone else. It's not a fight about hitting someone else. No, the Greek word here, fight, the good fight of faith, is actually in the connotation or in the context of not just you and somebody else duking it out, but it's like it's in a public arena or in like a public forum. It's a public contest held in this arena where there is a prize that is laid up for the winner. That's what that word implies. Not just you and somebody else duking it out and whoever wins is the better man. We see here that there is a prize attached to this. And that's what this word fight here means. Think more along the lines of a boxing match or an MMA fight. Most of those guys, now yes, there is some bad blood between some of those contestants, some of those fighters, but for the most part, you know what I see when I get one of the pay-per-views? I see, at the very beginning of the bout, man, they'll slap hands. They'll tap hands like, hey, let's just have a good fight. At the end of it, regardless of who has won or who has lost, they'll hug each other out. But what they're fighting for is not necessarily fighting against one another. They're fighting because there is a $50,000 or $100,000 prize that is before them, and so they're going to give it their all to win that prize. And in the same way, that's the fight of faith that we have. That there is a prize. My fight's not with you. Your fight's not with me. But yet we're called to fight this good fight of faith. Why? Because there is a prize for each and every one of us. What? To excel in life. To experience God's goodness here upon earth. And so that raises three questions, and we'll end our service with this. When it comes to fighting, how do we fight? Who do we fight? And why do we fight? How do we fight? How do we fight as born-again believers? How do we fight the good fight of faith? Number one, you'd never fight alone. It may feel like you're alone, but you're not because you've got the greater one on the inside of you. So in that regard, you're not alone. Never fight alone, which shows us the importance of having a good home church, being surrounded by believers of like precious faith that can stand in the gap with you and that can help you in your struggles, help you in those valleys, help you in those down times, those times of heaviness, get through and on to what God has for you. That's the importance of surrounding yourself with a corporate body. That's how He wants you to fight. I remember when Clay went into, Clay's my youngest son, he's in the Air Force, he's in Lackland Air Force Base right now in San Antonio, Texas. I remember one of the first things he began to tell us as he got on there was they were not allowed to go anywhere on base by themselves as a new cadet. They couldn't go anywhere by themselves. They had to have at least one other person. And most of the time they were given I forget the official term of it, but it was like a buddy. They had to go everywhere with this buddy. When they got time on base, liberty on base, where they could go to the store, where they could go get something to eat, they couldn't even do that by themselves. They had to go with this buddy. Why? Because from the very beginning, they are training them that you are not in this alone, that this is not your fight alone, and you are stronger when you've got someone else with you. Carry this person with you. Go together. There's safety in this. He's got your back while you've got his back. And so it is when it comes to us being a part of a local body, being a part of a group of people of light, precious faith. Because we're not meant to do this alone. What does 2 Corinthians chapter 10 says this? 2 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 4 says, "For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of God." Notice that the Bible, what it's saying here is our mind at many times can be our biggest enemy. Our mind can be our biggest enemy, but it goes back to our weapons are not natural, our weapons are not carnal, but each and every day we ought to put on that helmet of salvation, that hope of salvation, that hope that is an anchor to our souls. We have supernatural weapons to guard our minds when it comes to how do we fight, that you do not have to do this alone, that you don't have to go about life all by yourself. And another thing is never fight on the devil's terms. Never fight on the devil's terms. I remember Brother Hagin always used to say, if the devil can keep you in the arena of reason, he will beat you every single time. But if you keep the devil in the arena of faith, you will beat him every single time. Stay out of your emotions in that regard, because that's where the devil will trip you up. Don't fight on his terms. He's not out to bring you a fair fight. I remember I was in high school. I went to Hewitt-Trussville, and I was in either 9th or 10th grade. I forget which one I was in. But there was one day, there were these two guys. One of these guys was massive, literally massive. I mean, at least, at my age, at that size and, what I weighed at that point, I just looked at this guy and I thought, man, this guy's massive. I think he was even he was. He was a football player. So he was on the football team. And him and some other guy had gotten into this dispute. And this other kid, I'm telling you, he was scrawny. I mean, you look at this and you think, all right, but if I have to choose between this guy and this guy, I'm taking the football player, that this guy is going to win the fight. Maybe you've seen scenarios like that. And so they agreed that after school they were going to meet out in the parking lot. After school was over, because that way you couldn't necessarily, at least they said, you couldn't get in trouble because it wasn't during school time. So they go out to the parking lot, and I'm talking about there's a circle of people around these two guys. And so they're about to duke it out. And so this football player, for whatever reason, I have no idea, I don't know if it was to show off, his body or something like that, all of a sudden he begins to take off his t-shirt. I'm telling you, that scrawny kid saw an opportunity, he went bam! He took that guy down and beat the living whatever out of him. I'm talking about gave it to him. Because in a fair fight, I guarantee you that football player is the bigger of the two. He's going to see it as, and you're going to see it as, there's no way that this kid's going to win. Quit looking for a fair fight with the devil. He's not going to fight you fair. He's going to come to you when you were, oh, please, devil, just give me a moment to catch my breath. He's not going to do it. Oh, devil, can you give me just a break for a day? Can you let me see a little bit of light? It's so dark in here. He's not going to give you that. So why do you fight? Why fight the devil fair? No, you've got everything that you need right here to whip him and, forever deal with him in your life. Through the tests and the trials that he may bring your way. How? Starts with hope. Hope. So how do we fight? Never fight alone and never fight on the devil's terms. Who do we fight? Well, if you'll take the time once again to study 1 Peter chapter 3, 1 Peter chapter 1, I believe it's in verse 21, 22, and 23, you'll find where he talks about we need to have a fervent love for one another. We need to love one another. In other words, we don't need to be fighting among each other. My fight's not with you. It never has been. It never will be. Your fight's not with me. Your fight shouldn't be with the person that's next to you, a spouse or a friend or a child. That's not your fight. We know that Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 says what? Turn over there. We'll find it. Ephesians chapter 6, where we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but what? But principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness of this world, spiritual wickedness in high places. That's the fight that we're called to fight. That's who we're up against. We need to know who it is that we're up against. The church should be motivated to live for Jesus. That's our responsibility. The church should be motivated to live for Jesus. And yet at the same time, we ought to be adding values to others in our lives and to ourselves last. I remember there was a song when I was in children's church. I remember him singing it. He went, J-O-Y, J-O-Y, this is what it means. Jesus first, yourself last, and others in between. So true. J-O-Y, J-O-Y, this is what it means. Jesus first, if you break it down as an acronym, yourself last, and others in between. We've got to keep Jesus at the forefront of everything that we do. And then you're better served if you put other people above yourself. It'll keep the fight out of you. It'll keep that fight with that person at bay. If you will look for ways to add value to other people. Because faith does not prosper or increase at someone else's expense. No, in faith, everybody wins. By faith, everybody wins. Most people, what they're chasing is success. Nothing wrong with wanting to be successful, but when it comes at the expense of someone else, then it becomes a chase that there's no fruit in it. Most people are chasing success, but what you ought to be chasing is adding values to others. Adding value to other people. Adding value to their world. Keeping yourself last. I know that I like this quote by John Maxwell. I'll read this. It says, it may appear to some that when we finish last instead of first, it may appear to some that we finish last instead of first. But that's a misunderstanding of the race we're running and how we define winning. When the race we run is about others, then when they finish ahead of us, that's a win for us. John Maxwell said that. And that's the attitude that I want to carry in life. That's what I want to be known for. You see, I want my two sons, I want them to go further than I ever have been in life. I want them to go beyond anything I ever did. I want to set them up by imparting to them daily, imparting them as often as I can, to add value to their world so that they can go further than I've ever been. That's the right attitude. That's what we need to carry. So who do we fight? We don't fight one another. What we do is we fight to add value to other people in our lives. And then finally, why do we fight? Turn over to Nehemiah chapter 4. Nehemiah chapter 4. Nehemiah is the story of a man who a group of people have come to, and they said, the walls of Jerusalem are broken down. They're torn down, they're tattered. We need to come together and build these things up. And Nehemiah went to the king, and he got permission to take him and a group of people and build these walls back up, to see the walls of Jerusalem restored in their days. Because God wanted his people to have a place where they could worship him. And so Nehemiah, he begins to undertake this. And opposition comes at him left and right, left and right. Haters come at him. They make fun of him. They mock him. They ridicule him. What are you doing? What are you doing up there on that wall? What are you building? Man, that's the most pathetic thing I've ever seen. Even a fox could get through that wall. It's not going to last. You're not going to make it. And so they're continually hearing this. And Nehemiah is the leader. They're continually hearing this. And finally, Nehemiah brings everybody together and he says, look, he says, I know that people are talking about us. I know that they're saying that we're not going to get this done. I know that they're saying that we shouldn't be doing this. But he pulls them together, and in Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 14, he says, and I looked and rose up and said unto the nobles and to the rulers and to the rest of the people, be not you afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren. Fight for your sons. Fight for your daughters. Fight for your wives. And fight for your houses. You need to fight. You need to fight. You need to fight the good fight of faith. Why? Because you have people that need to see you come out victorious. God needs you to get beyond what you're dealing with. God needs you to be victorious in the fight which is in front of you right now. God needs you to overcome that temptation. God needs you to win that fight in your body. He needs you to overcome that situation in your marriage. He needs it. Why? So that it's a testimony to other people. It's a testimony where others can see that whereby maybe they're not as far along as you are in their Christian walk. But they see, you know what? I've got hope. Because if they can do it, then I can do it. If they can make it, then I can make it. Psychologists ask this question. When you look back on your experiences in life and think of those things you regret, what would you say you regret more? Those things that you did but wish you hadn't? Or those things that you didn't do but wish that you had? 75% answered that they wish they had regrets for the things that they had not done. They wish they had done more. They wish they would have gone further. They wish they would have stayed with that good fight of faith and pressed through into the presence of Jesus. Not their regrets, not what they had done, but what lied ahead of them. That's why we need to fight the good fight of faith. I asked you in the beginning, if you knew that hope and despair were the same paths that led to the same destination, which would you choose? I hope it's hope. I hope it's hope. I hope it's hope. Thomas Edison was 67 years old. He had spent every cent that he had given over 10 years to this particular invention. And one night, a fire swept through his lab and abolished and erased and burned up everything. He had spent all of his money. It took his equipment, it took his notes, it burned down the entire lab. Insurance only gave him back 10% of what he had invested in it. But Thomas Edison said this. He says, there is great value in tragedy because it burns up every one of your mistakes. Thank God we can start anew. 3 weeks later, he produced the first phonograph. Aren't you thankful that somebody in your life stayed with it? That we can fight the good fight of faith. And I encourage you, never let go of hope. Continue to believe in your life, and you'll see the expectations and that which God has for your life. Amen.